The Seaview Hotel stood perched on a cliff, overlooking the tumultuous ocean below. Built in the 1920s, it was a place of faded grandeur, its once vibrant past now just a whisper in the salty sea breeze. The waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks, a reminder of the isolation that surrounded the hotel. By day, the view was breathtaking, but by night, the darkness seemed to swallow the building whole, leaving only an eerie silhouette against the stormy sky. Emily had always preferred the quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling noise of her past retail jobs. When she accepted the night shift at Seaview Hotel, it felt like a dream, a peaceful escape from the chaos of the day. The lobby greeted her with dim lights and an air of old-world charm. The silence was palpable, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting to reveal its secrets. George, the night manager she was replacing, had an air of weariness about him. His eyes, lined with years of sleepless nights, seemed to carry the weight of the hotel's history. As he handed Emily the heavy brass keys, his fingers trembled slightly. There was something in his gaze, a shadow of something he wasn't saying, a warning unspoken. "Just don't go up to the 6th floor," George said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily chuckled, thinking he was trying to spook her, but George's face remained solemn, his eyes filled with something akin to fear. He nodded once, as if to confirm his own words, then turned and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit lobby. The first few hours of Emily's shift were uneventful. She sat behind the reception desk, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up at the security monitors. The hotel was silent, with only 3 rooms occupied. The calmness should have been reassuring, but in the vast emptiness of the hotel, it only served to amplify the loneliness. The security monitors displayed various angles of the hotel's hallways and staircases, all of them deserted. The screens flickered occasionally, a reminder of the hotel's age. Emily's eyes darted between the screens, the static hum of the monitors the only sound in the lobby. The emptiness of the hallway seemed almost unnatural, as if the hotel itself was holding back its breath. At midnight, Emily decided to make her rounds. She grabbed the heavy, old-fashioned flashlight from under the desk, the metal cold against her skin. The beam of light cut through the darkness as she moved through the hotel. She started in the basement, where the boiler hummed softly, the only sound in the otherwise silent space. The laundry room was dark and empty, the air thick with the scent of detergent and the faint smell of dampness. She picked up a few stray towels, tossing them into a cart before moving on. The floors creaked under Emily's feet as she walked down the first-floor hallway. The walls were lined with old photographs of the hotel in its heyday, the sepia tones giving them a ghostly appearance. The faces in the photographs seemed to watch her as she passed, their eyes following her every move. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust, the atmosphere heavy with memories of a time long past. When Emily reached the 3rd floor, she noticed something strange. The air felt heavier here, and the faint smell of salt water hung in the air, like the ocean had seeped into the very walls of the hotel. She paused outside room 311, the room registered to the businessman. She thought she heard something, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone tapping their fingers against the wall. She knocked softly, but there was no answer. After a moment, the tapping stopped. A chill ran down her spine as she moved on, the sound lingering in her mind. When morning finally came, the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the ocean. Emily felt a wave of relief as the shadows retreated with the rising sun. George arrived right on time, looking more tired than ever. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't ask how her night had gone. He already knew. "How was it?" he asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really want to hear the answer.
"It was quiet,"
Emily replied, trying to sound casual, but the memory of the tapping still lingered.
"It was strange, though. I heard tapping in room 311.
George's expression darkened instantly. His shoulders tensed, and for a moment, he looked like he was about to say something, but instead he just nodded, his face grim. "It's probably just the pipes," he said, his voice flat, dismissive, but Emily could see the fear lurking behind his eyes. As the days passed, Emily fell into a routine. Check in the few guests who arrived, make her rounds, and try to ignore the occasional strange noise or flicker of the lights. But every night, as she sat behind the desk, She found her eyes drawn to the elevator. The sixth floor loomed in her mind, growing more mysterious and enticing with each passing night. George's warning echoed in her thoughts, but curiosity tugged at her, tempting her to see what lay beyond those forbidden doors. By the end of her first week, Emily's curiosity had become too much to resist. The hotel was quiet, with only one guest that night, a middle-aged man who had checked in late and gone straight to his room. Emily waited until after her first round, then stood in front of the elevator, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated for a moment, George's words playing in her mind, before pressing the button for the sixth floor. The elevator creaked and groaned as it ascended, the ancient cables straining with the effort. The air inside the elevator grew colder with each floor, and Emily felt a sense of dread growing inside her. When the doors finally slid open, Emily was greeted by a cold, musty air that made her wrinkle her nose. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from a single, flickering bulb at the far end. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the carpet was worn and stained, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. The air was thick and oppressive, and Emily felt as if the walls were closing in on her. She stepped out of the elevator, the doors closing behind her with a soft thud, leaving her alone in the silent, shadowy corridor. Emily's footsteps echoed loudly as she walked down the hallway, each step increasing her sense of unease. She passed several closed doors, all of them unmarked and uninviting, but at the end of the corridor, one door stood out. It was slightly ajar, the number 616 barely visible on the tarnished brass plate. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest as she reached for the doorknob. Her hand trembled as she moved closer, her mind racing with thoughts of what might be inside. Before she could touch it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing the darkness within. The room was dark, the only light coming from a small window on the far side, where the moonlight filtered through heavy, dust-covered curtains. The furniture was old and decrepit, covered in a thick layer of dust, and the bed was unmade, as if someone had left in a hurry. Emily stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking under her weight. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the hotel, and it carried the faint scent of salt water, mingled with something mustier, older. The room felt wrong, as if it was out of place, existing in a different time entirely. As Emily moved deeper into the room, her flashlight beam swept across the walls. The wallpaper was faded and water-stained, but in the center of the room, a large patch of it had been torn away, revealing a section of bare wall. Emily stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she noticed something strange. Dozens of names had been scratched into the plaster, the letters jagged and uneven. Some were nearly illegible, worn away by time, but others were clear, painfully so. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw a name she recognized, George's. It was etched deep into the wall, the letters harsh and desperate, like a cry for help. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind Emily, making her jump. The sound reverberated through the room and the temperature plummeted, her breath becoming visible in the freezing air. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Emily backed away from the scratched names, her heart pounding in her ears, every instinct screaming at her to leave. But the door wouldn't budge when she tried the knob, the metal icy cold under her fingers. The room was closing in on her, and she could feel a presence behind her, something that made her skin crawl. Then the scratching began. It started softly, like the tapping she had heard outside room 311, but this was different, more frantic, more desperate. The sound seemed to come from all around her, as if dozens of people were clawing at the walls trying to escape. Emily's pulse quickened, her fear rising to a fever pitch. She reached for the doorknob again, pulling at it with all her strength, but it wouldn't move. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, and then a voice whispered in her ear, cold and menacing.
You shouldn't have come here.
It hissed, the words sending a wave of terror through her. Emily screamed, pounding on the door, begging for it to open. But the walls were closing in, the shadows deepening, and the scratching became a cacophony of horror, surrounding her, suffocating her. She could feel the presence behind her, growing stronger, its cold breath on the back of her neck. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled, the darkness threatening to consume her. Just when she thought she would lose her mind, The door flew open, and she stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. She didn't look back as she ran to the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The next morning, George arrived for his shift, his heart heavy with dread. He knew what he would find, but he still hoped that somehow Emily had escaped the hotel's grasp. But when he reached the lobby, his worst fears were confirmed. Emily's name was scratched into the registry, her room number listed as 616. George sighed, his eyes filled with sorrow and resignation. The hotel had claimed another victim, and soon someone else would come to take Emily's place. The cycle would continue as it always had, and there was nothing he could do to stop it.